So today you're here because we're going to be talking about licensing, something that I think that is underutilized, in a lot of cases is not known. And let me start by saying, who here has got medical device or medical tech IP? Most do, some maybe, some not. You probably all have intellectual property. Well, I can tell you probably all do, and the question is, what are you going to do with that technology? The most common route is to set up a business, but today we're going to be talking about something different. So what I'm going to be covering today is, first of all, I want to talk about the med tech industry because there's a lot that's going on. It's a fast-changing industry. For those of you that are in it, that are active in it, you know that what's happening today, something different is happening tomorrow. You look at the FDA, you look at the regulatory, you look at the business side of it, you look at the reimbursement, everything is changing so quickly. So I'm going to be talking about that and why that is important in understanding the context for licensing and why it presents an opportunity. From there, we'll get into why use licensing, what the process is, how it works, how you get paid, how you find licensing partners. And then most importantly is wrap up with questions and answers because I wanted to hear from you about your IP. One of the things that I like to do during this type of workshop is to ask questions of you, find out your IP, and see if we can do a little application of what I talk about here directly to what you are working on with your own intellectual property. So to begin with, just a brief introduction about myself. My business is licensing. I run a consulting agency. I work on strategy consulting, the licensing side of it, IP audits. IP audit basically to figure out what IP you have and whether it's protected. I work with a lot of different companies, a lot of med device and med tech companies, oral blue light technology, a desk surfer for balance. Recently I picked up a new client called the Innovation Lab here in Newport Beach, who works with various hospital and research labs throughout the country, developing various medical devices to help them in developing the commercialization side or the out-licensing of that, as well as some surgical devices in the spinal area. And then one of my newest clients, believe it or not, is in the toilet business. They have actually invented an improvement to the toilet. And it sounds strange that a toilet can be improved, but it actually can. And in fact, the blue light technology that you see up there is actually an improvement to the toothbrush in enabling you to better oral hygiene. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in terms of case studies as we go through this. So I'd like to begin with talking about the med tech market. You're probably all very familiar with this, but it's growing very fast. It's one of the largest growing markets, not only here, but around the world. You're seeing every country, just about on every continent, it is involved at some level with development and implementation of medical devices, medical technologies, because it is a big subject and it's something that is having a direct impact on the lives and the economies of countries around the world. And that's one of the reasons that it's one of the fastest growing and biggest industries. But it's also something to understand is it's also a very fast changing industry. What happens today can be completely different tomorrow, and I'm sure you see that with the regulations, with government, with the FDA, with the devices introduced, with the players that are coming in. Where will the market go? Well, eventually it's headed toward do-it-yourself medicine. Will it eventually wind up in aisle 16 of Kmart where you can find your pacemaker? Quite possibly. They're all positioning for it, from retailers to insurance companies, big data companies. Everybody is positioning, seeing this market as revolutionizing healthcare, especially in the United States. But it's also bringing about some big challenges for you as IP med device inventors, companies evolving, and that is your technologies have a shorter and shorter lifespan. And the reason is because new technologies are coming in. You see this innovation happening every day. And the result today is just because you get a patent that says it's granted for 20 years doesn't mean that your technology is going to last, have an economic lifestyle for 20 years. The reason being is there's so much new innovation that's coming into the market that it's changing, it's either obsoleting or pushing it out of the market as a result of something new and different coming in. Maybe it's more efficient, maybe it's different, but there's no longer that window anymore. And this has a lot of implications, especially for the larger medical device companies, which I'm going to talk about, from the standpoint of the development cycle. You don't have years to develop anymore. It's really come down to literally months. And the reason for this, and it goes to what you see up here, is the huge influx of new patents that are coming into this market. We're talking tens of thousands of patents being granted in the medical device and the medical tech space. And the reason it's such a large number is it's not only the United States, but this is globally. It used to be 20 years ago, the United States was the only game in town. You could play, you could get your patent, nobody else was going to come into the territory. Now, you have IP laws harmonized, meaning that they've finally gotten their act together around the world, especially in Asia and India, and now you've got innovation coming in from everywhere. And it's not only the United States. And as these medical technologies come in and these patents are granted, it means the market is not only getting more competitive, it means it's not only shortening your innovation lifespan, but it's also creating potential conflicts down the road in terms of just what kind of clear market you have for your device. Because part of the challenge in the United States Patent Office and patent offices around the world is they can't keep up. These are human beings that are working on these patent claims. And these patents, and I'm sure some of you have filed them, are getting longer and longer, more and more complex. And the patent office has a tough time keeping up. A case in point, and this happens, and this is why the game is changing so quickly. Cannabis is now being legalized in the United States. Right now, most companies are having a difficult time trying to protect their cannabis IP. Why? A number of reasons. One, nobody in the Patent and Trademark Office has any experience with cannabis, especially cannabis strains, cannabis biotechnology, cannabis pharmaceuticals. Nobody has any experience. The patents that are being granted are almost being granted blindly because these people have no experience. So what's happening is a slowdown. The second issue is if you're a cannabis company, you can't protect your brand or trademark right now in the United States. The reason, because federally, cannabis is illegal, but on a state level, it's legal. So now you've got a second challenge there of what happens with your investing all your money and trying to get your brand. And then, of course, the third issue is changing regulation. Will it get legal, will it not? I share that with you so you understand the dynamics of what goes on, and it's something to keep in mind that when you get a patent, don't just sit back and think that a patent is going to stop anybody. It doesn't. Keep in mind, a patent, all a patent does is give you what's called a negative right. What a negative right means is if somebody uses it without your authorization, you can go sue them if you can afford to do it. That's the key. If you can afford to do it. So that's leading to some other challenges in the market. One of them is the players that are coming into the market. Now, you're all familiar with probably the Johnson & Johnsons, the Medtronics, the Strykers, all those players. They've been around for a long time. But they are not the only ones that are coming into the medical technology and medical industry. You're seeing a lot of companies, pharmaceutical companies are coming into it, consumer electronics companies are coming into it, and big high-tech companies are coming into it. Everybody is converging on this industry at the same time, and you say, why is that? Because the health industry is one of the largest in the world, but it also has inside it a lot of things that are very profitable, a lot of companies, particularly data. And all the medical technology and devices that are being created, they're all being designed to do one thing. What is that? To monitor data and figure out a better way to treat patients, whether it's your heart rate, whether it's your pulse, whether it's diagnosing a disease, whether it's administering medication in a better way. These are all data devices, and they're all being interconnected. And they're all electronic devices. And for a lot of these companies, they're looking at it and they're saying, well, the traditional medical device companies are looking at this going, we better figure out a way to ramp up our pipeline because we're never going to be able to compete with all the new innovation entering the market. The biggest consumer electronics companies in the world, the Toshibas, the Fujitsus, the LGs, the companies like that who dominate the retail shelves with consumer electronics, they are not sitting back and letting medical devices, when they eventually mature and get into the retail market, start to occupy the shelves and push them out. Quite the contrary. What they are doing is they are actively getting their own medical device and technology patents. They're starting to look for ways to get into the market. Their one challenge is they have people that are really good at building TV sets and microwaves. They don't know a darn thing about what it takes to do a medical device and get it approved and get it through the FDA. If you're looking for an opportunity to consult, consider one of these big companies. And then, of course, let's not forget Google, Apple, Microsoft, and all those players. What are they after? They're after the data. And their intention is to be the middle person to connect your device to any hospital, insurance provider, patient, whatever the case is. They're coming into the game, and they're not sitting back waiting to just connect to their device. They're doing their own devices. They're getting their own patents. So you've got this convergence coming in, and there you are in the middle of it all. And this makes it an incredibly challenging market for you as an entrepreneur or a small business trying to build a business. And then let's not forget product development. It's easy to develop a medical device or technology, isn't it? No, it's not easy. And it's getting more complex, and it's getting more competitive and more expensive every year. Why is that? Because as these new innovations that I talk about come into the market, suddenly you're overlapping. Suddenly that medical device that you've got for monitoring my heart rate, you've got to go out and get a license for that LED screen. You've got to get a license for those components. The medical device industry is headed in the same direction as the consumer electronics industry. And for those of you that are not aware, what happens is in an industry, and let's look at smartphones. Everybody's got a smartphone. Okay, those smartphone manufacturers, they don't get to build those smartphones and just use all of these components. The reason is those are all IP. So what's happened in the smartphone and the electronics industry is all these companies have all these patents, and they've created patent pools. And these patent pools then allow these different IP components to be used by all these smartphone manufacturers. If they didn't form patent pools, everybody would be litigating and there would be no smartphone industry. If they didn't form patent pools, you wouldn't be getting computers. If they didn't have patent pools, you wouldn't even be able to fly on airplanes. Because what happens is there's so much technology coming into the market to make these things that everybody steps on their feet. The same thing is happening in the medical device industry. Patent pools are being formed. At some point, you may invent something. You may have a patent for an internal technology and integration. You're going to need to find a patent pool to put it in, because it's going to become what's called a standard essential component or technology for other manufacturers. And believe me, the game of litigation is not a cheap game to play. And it can be debilitating. And for most small businesses, they can't even compete at that level. And that's why patent pools are formed. So at some point, the government eventually steps in and starts to mandate that patent pools have to be formed. Basically, it's a way of leveling the playing field. And what happens is, and a patent pool is a good thing for you, by the way. You get into a patent pool and you get paid out of that pool on everything. Some of the biggest patent pools are like the MPEG every time you play a movie off of a smartphone on your computer. It's one of the oldest pools. They generate billions of dollars in royalties every year. Billions, not millions, billions. And they distribute that among all the MPEG patent holders, which are some of the biggest companies in the world and small companies. This is evolving in the medical device industry as well. That's why product development is not going to be as simple as it once was. Plus the time it takes to development. Let's not forget our friends at the FDA and all the regulatory approvals. Those are easy to understand, right? They never change the rules. We know exactly where the market's going and how we get it done. No. Europe just changed the rules. The United States is trying to figure out how to harmonize it. India, China, everybody is trying to figure out how are we going to make this work. Right now you have the rules change in one country, so everybody jumps over to another like Australia. Well, maybe we can get the registration there and then come back to the US. Then Australia changes the rules, or somebody decides they don't want to accept that. This is a pretty crazy way of evolving industry. So you have to understand the rules are changing. And by the way, the rules are changing for patents too. They're looking at the patents. They're trying to figure out a better way to make it simpler and easier and quicker so that there's less litigation. But that's even a longer term perspective. But I share this with you so you understand you're playing inside of a very, very dynamic market that's changing all the time. And finally, I'm sure that all of you have this. You have all of the money and manpower and resources you need to get your medical device to the market, right? No. Most of the time you're going to lack something, and that can often be the most challenging part, and that can often be the deal killer, the deal stopper, send you sideways, halt you in your track, force you back to the market for more money. So product development becomes even more challenging in this market as a result of all these. And then let's not forget, as I mentioned earlier, the patents and what's coming in to the medical device market. Well, it happened in electronics, it happens in smartphones, and folks, I'm here to tell you, it's happening in the medical device industry. It's called patent litigation and patent trolls. They are coming in the market fast and furious for the same reasons that they went into the smartphone and electronics. Because of all of the patents that are coming in, a lot of them are not good. A lot of them have crossover claims. They see an opportunity. Now, there's pros and cons of patent trolls, but the issue that it presents is that litigation is only going to increase in this industry and decrease, and not decrease, which means it's increasing your liability. It makes it more challenging. Because you have to remember that just because you have a patent, just because you get your device approved by the FDA, just because you're getting it sold at retail, does not immune you from a patent litigation case at some point. They don't file these things right away. They wait till you're nice and successful in the market and have lots of money. Okay, and they're not necessarily going after small businesses, so don't get me wrong on that. In fact, there's ways in which you can use them. But the point to remember is that when you see all these trends happening, you have to be asking yourself, what is going to be my best strategy in this marketplace? And that brings us to the point of licensing and why licensing is a smart strategy. And the best reason why licensing is a smart strategy is because all these big players want your IP. They need your IP. And I mentioned this earlier on because the innovation cycle is shorter, product development is shorter, and these big companies, who's worked inside these big companies before? They're just real fast at product development, aren't they? They move these things along really quick. No, they can't. And it's because they are these huge, monstrous companies that have internal systems that work in a certain way, and it may take 2 years, it may take 3 years. Well, in the medical device industry, technology today, they don't have 2 or 3 years anymore. Because in 2 or 3 years, that technology could be obsolete or offset by something else that comes into the market. So they are actively out there trying to find startups, IP owners, inventors with the type of IP that they are looking for so that they can start filling their pipeline. And it's not an easy task, by the way. I work in licensing, and one of the things about licensing is that it's still a one-on-one process. They're setting up innovation portals. I don't know how many of you have ever tried to use one of these innovation portals, but you go to them, whether it's a Colgate or a Philips. They'll ask you, sometimes they'll put up all sorts of projects that they're working on, saying this is the type of IP we're looking for, this is the type of IP, and then they'll have a form you can fill out. You can tell them about your patent, you can tell them why you address it, and you can give them all this information, and you hit enter, and they say, we'll let you know. Well, it's like a vortex, right? You get sucked in there and you never know. Well, here's the problem with that, and it's much like what goes on at the patent office. That you hit enter and it goes to the receiving end. Now, who's at the receiving end of that? Well, it's not going to be some nuclear scientist or physicist or biotechnologist that's going to understand every science and technology that comes through that innovation portal. Most likely it's going to be somebody that has to sift through it. This is where the problem comes in. A lot of times they can't even identify if the technology is viable or they can even use it. Case in point, I have one client, we worked on a deal, it was the blue light technology. Got a deal put together with SmithKline, Glaxo, got their R&D team on the phone, and we had meetings with them. The first phase of that was they liked the concept, they understood that this is something different for the toothbrush market, but they're scientists, and we're talking about people that have 20, 30 years experiences, knew of blue light, but not about blue light. They had to spend another 2 months going back and educating themselves about blue light technology to determine whether or not it was viable enough for them to move forward. 2 months before we could even get back on the phone and move forward on further discussions. That is an example of what happens with these technologies. These companies can't understand everything you've got. They may understand it conceptually, but when it comes down to evaluating, so that's one of the first things you have to understand, and I'm going to talk about this point a little further on, is whatever technology that you've got, you have to understand that when you're out there with it, especially licensing, you have to have certain pieces of information and certain documents in a certain way that you can help them understand the technology and the validity of it. And it's an area that people fall down a lot. Most people's impulse is to, well, I'll just feed them all the information and they'll get it. I can tell you, you'd be shocked. These people do not get it. The most obvious things you think, because again, especially big companies, their culture is based on what they've been used to dealing with. And if you're a pharmaceutical company, if you never had experience with oral health care and toothbrushes, I can tell you it's a mess. It just doesn't work because they have a learning curve and nobody really understands what's going on. And that's part of the challenge of dealing with these companies. And to bear this out, Forbes did a survey of major medical device companies, and they asked them, how are you filling your pipeline? Where is your product development coming from today? 80% of them said outside collaboration, partnerships, relationships with companies such as yourself, because it's the only way that they can fill their internal pipeline. So you have to understand they're hungry for it, they need it, they want it. The challenge is, how do you connect with them and find the right people, which I'm going to talk about a little further on. So now we'll get into the nuts and bolts of this, and this is really about how you move about the licensing process. You all have IP, and you're all at different stages with your IP. And so one of the first things that I want to address is, when is the right time to license your intellectual property? Well, the right time is really at the point where you validated the technology. And validation means that you've developed a prototype, you've done focus groups, you've done some market testing, maybe you've had some sales, but you've done something to prove the consumer wants to buy it and will use it. And that's important, because if you haven't done anything to validate it, it makes it very, very challenging for a company to want to license it or even consider it. Because remember, it's like anything else. When you're starting a company and you're going to raise money, what's the number one thing that's on the investor's mind when they look at you to make an investment? What? ROI. But what is the number one factor that always is at the top of their list in terms of concern? Risk. How risky is it? The same holds true for licensing. How risky is your IP? The more you do to diminish that risk, the more attractive it's going to be to license it. If you go in there with just a rough prototype and say, well, we've never done consumer testing, we've never validated, we've never done any research, we don't have any third-party research, how much risk is that showing these companies? Saying there's a lot of risk. But if you've been out there, if you've built prototypes, even samples, had some sales, done some research studies, some market studies, you're starting to bring the risk down, because you're able to show them that people will buy it, will use it, will like it, whatever the case is. And the same thing holds true for how to make it. I mean, a lot of times you have to understand how to make it. And this is another point that people trip up on in validation, and I'll talk a bit more, is making it. Because one mistake that's always made is you create your intellectual property based on what you like and the way you think it's going to look cool or it's going to operate cool, but you fail to take into account how it's actually going to be made. And I can tell you, more times than not, when I have meetings with companies and they're evaluating an IP, one of the biggest reasons that they decline in intellectual property is after they evaluate it and they like the technology, they just cannot make it the way that it's designed. It would have to be completely redesigned. And it's a deal killer. And one of the hurdles that you have to get over is being able to take your IP and saying, is there any way that this thing can be, what is the easiest way to make it? Karen and I were talking about this earlier on, and that's why, you know, coming to a lab such as this to get this kind of data is finding out what is the easiest way to make it. Because again, when you're talking about risk, when you're talking about hurdles, the easier you make it for these companies, the more likely it is they're going to want the IP. When they have to try to figure this out, it makes it much more difficult. And to a certain extent, they're looking for, they've got time is an issue for them. And so anything that's going to take them a long time to have to try to re-engineer, to configure, so you're going to want to be closer to the point of sales than not. And it's important to understand, and I think a lot of people miss this point, is licensing is a process. It's not a document. A lot of people get that confused. How many people think license is an agreement? It is an agreement. But licensing is a process. Much like you have a marketing system, a sales system, product development system, well, licensing has its own system, a certain set of things that you have to do to move your IP into the market, to find interested companies, to present the information, to get the feedback, to open up the discussions, and to move it through. And it's a process that takes time. The more complex that your technology is, the longer it takes. The bigger the companies, the longer it takes. About the only time you can speed it up is if you have a movie coming out about your technology that's going to hit the big screens and distributed in 2,400 theaters nationwide. Short of that, it's going to take some time. And that's why it's important to understand that because it is a process, you need to put it in play sooner rather than later, and ideally at that point of validation. And by the way, when you start the licensing process, when you move through it doesn't mean you stop anything. You keep going with your development, you keep going with your validation, you keep moving toward the market. Because the closer you get, the more interested they're going to be. And it moves along. And ideally what you do is you put it on a track, on your marketing track, to go at the same time as your go-to-market, your direct go-to-market. Because one or both of them can come to fruition at the same time. And you can do them both at the same time. Because you do one doesn't mean that you can't do the other. You can go direct and you can go to the market. That's how Bill Gates became a huge success with Microsoft. He was a startup. He had no money. He had no internal resources. He barely had a company. He came up with an idea for an operating system. And what did he do? He went to the world, at that time, the world's biggest computer company, who had what's called, at that time, a personal computer, but nobody could use the thing because it was so un-user-friendly. So he went to them and said, how about if I get you an operating system that people will like? And that's what he did. He got a hold of a program, reconfigured it, went to IBM and licensed it, and did a licensing deal and said, look, you install this in every computer that you sell on the market, take it out there, pay me a royalty. I only want to carve out one thing from that contract. And that is, I want the rights to sell this software under my own brand called Windows. And the rest is history. IBM went out, stuck it in millions of computers, spread it throughout the world, and then guess what happened when that software had to be upgraded? Guess who they went to? Bill Gates. And from there, he just used IBM's network, IBM's advertising, IBM's distribution, IBM's sales, IBM's everything, and that's what launched Microsoft. And that's just one example. Genentech is another one. When they first founded Genentech, they did not know how to do biotechnology, pharmaceuticals. So when they had that technology, the first thing they did is they started with a licensing deal. And they learned the industry through that licensing deal until some point when it was time to extend or renew that agreement. They terminated the agreement and took over the business. Okay? That's another strategy that's used in licensing. Licensing can be used to help build the market for you, and then at some point you can take over. I share these with you so you understand that it is a tool that you can use in many ways. And it doesn't always have to be about money. You can use it to get a lot of other things. So, real quick, on the timeline, and I had mentioned this to you before, it does take time. These are the basic steps to them. There is no set amount of time that any of these steps take. I can tell you this, though. Researching, contacting, and presenting and discussing, that's going to take you the longest time. That's where I spend the bulk of my time. It's called sales and business development. Getting out there, meeting those companies, sending them the information, getting response, figuring out who's responsible. That's where you spend the bulk of your time. Once you get to that point, negotiating deal terms and signing the agreement, that can move along pretty quick, just depends on the company and the attorneys. Sometimes it's an easy deal, sometimes it's a hard deal, but for the most part, it's this front end. And as I said, but don't be premature when you go to research and contact. Make sure you're at that point of being validating your technology, because when you're there, then you have something to talk about. And then I'll share with you how you spend your time in terms of sharing that information to get these companies to respond. So when you look at licensing your intellectual property, your medical device technology, there's many ways you can license it. I shared the example of what Bill did with Genentech. But it comes down to 4 things that you can do with your rights. They can make them, use them, sell them, or distribute them. And in most cases, when you do a license agreement, they get all of them. Sometimes it's only a sales license. Sometimes it's only a distribution. Sometimes they make it and you sell it. But that's, in essence, the rights that you've got to play with. And those rights can be divided up many ways in many territories. So that's the first part, is your IP rights. And on the handout I gave you, you've got these slides, so you're able to see that. The second part of it is the strategy. And that is, how are you going to license it? By markets, by channels, by customers, by territories, by applications. There's many ways you can license. Do you want to focus on your core market and license out to other markets? Here's an example. Dean is here with me. His technology is for the rehab market, the balance, helping people to regain after
MTBIs or dizziness, balance
Right.
issues.
Right. But part of that is there's a piece of this technology that can be pulled out because it has other market applications. And that is the balance portion of it. And that balance board portion of it has 3 market applications that we're going after. Standing desks, which in this, right now, today, one of the chronic diseases is what? Sitting disease. Sitting disease is leading to obesity and a lot of problems. And the market for standing desk, ergonomic desks is opening up. And what this standing desk does, the balance board now actually has positive health benefits, as proven by a research study. So that is one application. The second is for video games. And this one is very interesting because it's a bit of ahead of the curve, but there is interest in it. And here, what is the big challenge for the video game industry today? They're getting blowback because why? Kids sit around and do what? They sit and all they do is move their wrists. There's no exercise. So this technology also has an application where it can be interconnected into a video game. And suddenly that video game becomes an active, not a passive type of activity. And the third is for security training, the ability to enlarge this device, put an unstable platform, and allow military or police to train for unstable territory for target practice, shooting, something that they can't get without going outside. So here is an example of taking licensing where you're focusing on your core market, but at the same time you're looking at your licensing markets and carving that out and going after those markets simultaneously. Does this make sense? Anybody have questions on this? So this is an example. Now, all of these markets obviously take time to mature. The core markets you may get into, you have your sales going initially. Some of these markets, then you have to follow on. But this is an example of how you can use licensing at the same time. Think of it this way. If your IP can go into the consumer and the business and the medical professional and the hospital market, but you only have the resources to address one. And then you think about, well, we're going to get into this market first, and then we're going to go after those markets later. Do you think all those customers are going to wait for your IP to get to them? No. Because what's going to happen is you're not the only one out there with some technology, and yes, your technology is unique. Yes, you've invented it. Yes, it's terrific. But there are similar technologies. They come out all the time. Nothing is 100% unique. Okay? People come up with different configurations of it, and the real challenge is it's not the best IP that is the most successful at the market. Okay? It's the one that gets into the market, the best market. And again, I'll go back to Bill Gates, Windows. Every time you get a Windows upgrade, what happens? It's full of glitches. It's got all sorts of bug errors. The point is they don't wait. Because you can always help fix a customer problem. But if they waited until they got everything 100% right, something else is going to come along. And the same thing exists with your IP. You've got to address as many markets as you can, as quickly as you can. And either direct, licensing only. But whatever the case is, if they're there, the opportunity is to use licensing to get into as many markets as possible. Is this making sense? Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. And this brings us to the point, and I talked about this before, and I'm going to spend some time here validating your IP. This is so critical, and it's often not done, is you've got to validate that IP. You've got to test it, you've got to show it, you've got to prove it at some level. Obviously, test sales, small sales are always one of the best, but it doesn't have to be that, okay? It could be consumer or user tests, it could be third-party research, but things that validate that the technology is real, that it works, that people will use it, buy it, it solves the problem, whatever it does. And I mean, the validation is something that has to be done, especially if you're going to go through FDA approval. But for many companies, they don't do this validation. And there's a couple of pieces to validation, and I want to talk about it. From a licensing standpoint, excuse me, and I mentioned these, there's two pieces that are very important. One is market, and two is design. Obviously, you want to validate the market, but the second part, and I mentioned this earlier on, is the design. How is this thing going to be made? And again, if you've created it based on your own thoughts of it looks really cool and this is how we're going to build it, that's a bit of a challenge. You have a question?
When you say made, you mean manufactured?
Manufactured, okay. Meaning that, is there a, let's say you have a medical device and it needs a housing for it, okay? Is there already a housing, some kind of housing out there that this can be fitted into? If it needs components, can you use components? The reason goes back to this, whatever your IP is, don't get lost in the fact of what you have to build around it to make it do whatever it is delivers. Okay, the most important thing you can do is design it in such a way so that it's easy to make, easy to manufacture. Because that's one of the challenges companies have, is once they've invested in all these toolings, or they have this component supplier or that, or whatever the case is, it's real hard for them to grapple with another product that means we have to build another mold, we have to build another tool, we have to find components from this, this makes it very challenging. And what they all like to do, generally what they like to do, is they look for economies of scale by saying, how can we take your device, how can we take your technology and use it with what we currently have? And I just saw this recently with a client who had invented, it was actually a professional photography reflector or photograph that was hollow top. And it got a lot of interest, and we had a big company who liked the IP, they got the samples, they evaluated it for about a month, they went into meetings with senior people, but they ultimately came back and they said, we love the technology, but we're going to have to decline because the manufacturing is going to be too time-consuming and costly right now, because it had never been designed from the standpoint of what they needed. It was just designed from, this is a really good design that will do things and make it easier and better for photographers to use the market. But unfortunately, the realities of one of these big companies having to make it sets in, and they decline, even though they like the technology.
I'm just thinking about this, you talk about disruptive technology, but if you start with the customer in mind first and kind of work backwards in your process, excuse me, I don't know what that is.
I think they're alerting us to the heavy rains that are going on.
Emergency alert.
Yeah,
Not warning. Okay.
that's all right.
But you know where I'm going with that, and then you have these technologies where you bring something to market that's totally revolutionary. So you think maybe then you have to be able to demonstrate where the ROI is going to be in this model?
Well, that's actually a good point, because and this goes back to the design part of it. I can tell you just about every presentation I make, every discussion I have in a licensing meeting, the question that comes up is, how much is it going to cost to make? How much is it going to cost to make? That's what they ask. Because they need to get a head start, they need to get a handle on it. And if you don't know how much it's going to cost, or if you tell them, well, let's see, your tooling's going to cost you $350,000, and in this component, it's not going to be practical anymore. So you really have to think it. So it's almost like using the customer in the end, but not only is it the customer, but you have to think about it from the manufacturing, and it's something it's overlooked a lot. And that's why, I mean, believe me, there's a lot of great patents that are out there today, a lot of slick designs, a lot of really neat, on paper, functioning devices. But the reality is they can never come to market because they never took that into account. Another case in point, had a client working with the University of Arkansas on a new cooking technology. They developed a cooking technology that would reduce the fat content in fast food by 60%. Pretty neat technology. You thought, wow, cooking, this will be great. All the fast food companies will be interested in this technology. And this is one of the challenges. Going out there, initially I contacted every fast food company only to discover it's not that they weren't interested, they did no menu innovation. I discovered it's outsourced to all the big food production companies like the Dows and the Cargills and the DuPonts. They do all the menu innovations. And after doing some research, I discovered that one of the innovations that they're looking at is they're trying to develop oils, cooking oils, that they can still cook in but will be less fatty when the end product comes out. So I got a hold of Dow, and they were surprised I found them, and presented this technology. They all loved it, brought them all in there, went into the University of Arkansas to look at the technology, and it was a coating technology, basically using starches. It would coat, and then it goes through a baking process, and the oil is added after to the recipe, and it comes out with the same look, texture, feel, and even taste as fried, but with less oil. And it looked great when they went down to the test kitchen at the University of Arkansas. But guess what happens when they had to go up to Cargill's lab and test it there under real-world conditions? It didn't work because they couldn't remain consistency. It didn't work within the fry. There was a whole bunch of issues that were never addressed. It was just a slick technology developed and published. They never tested. One of the questions I got was out of a big chicken processor out of the South. I got the VP of marketing on the phone. They were excited about it. He says, hold on a minute. I got to get my VP of manufacturing on the phone. He's got some questions. He gets on the phone. He goes, look, I got to know. I got conveyor belts that run 2,000 chicken breasts an hour through, and I got to know if I put this coating on this cooking, is it going to be able to go through that conveyor belt? Because if it doesn't work, I can't use it. My answer was, I don't know. Never been tested. Then Cargill wanted it, said it's a great technology, but here's the problem. It's going to take us 1.5 years to test it with the customer. First with our fast food customer, McDonald's, and then with the people that eat it. Their question was, well, how long will it hold up under the red light? I don't know. How does it mix with our formulation? Will our chicken still taste crispy and peppery? I don't know. So this was an issue, and all the big guys were there. They loved it, but they couldn't do anything with it. It was too risky, too much testing involved with it. And that's where validation becomes so important. You have to think about it. So going back to the point of the customer, they're your customer too. And if you can get them and understand what they need, they're going to be more likely to want to license your IP. Make sense? Any questions? Are you hungry? No. So validation, and by the way, there's a lot of things going on in the market, and one of them here, and I put this up, anybody familiar with Apple's research kit? We were talking about this a little bit, but you know, Apple's coming into the market and they want to become a medical device, and they want to connect, so they've got research kit here, which the idea is that you can use the iPhone now to connect with patients to do these consumer studies, test studies, to do them quickly to figure out is your application, your whatever, the delivery device going to work, and gather up that data. So there are tools out there. Of course, you know, ultimately Apple's looking to secure their position in the data side of your business. But the point is there's lots of tools to do validation. You can even use social media today. Facebook, places like that, where you can get customer feedback. So it's challenging to do, but it's important to do. And the more that you can do this, the more likely it is that you're going to find a licensing partner. And that brings us to finding a licensing partner. And I shared with you some stories about it. And when you're looking at your partners, the most obvious companies are the ones that you put on your list, obviously, because if you're in med devices, maybe it's some of the local companies here, provided they have divisions that are in that market. But then you also need to look at second and third tier companies as well. Going back to my example earlier, is one of the things that is always challenging is that when you go after, if you have an improvement to a technology, and I'll use the toothbrush in this case, and you're introducing it to the market leaders, one would think that they would be interested in something that would make their brand, their product, even better, right? Wrong. Believe it or not, they are not necessarily interested, especially if it means it's going to disrupt their whole business. And this particular technology was blue light, and we thought for sure they'd be all over it. The technology had come up, but they're not. In fact, it was a player coming into the market. In this case, it was a pharmaceutical company. But you want to look at second and third tier companies, and more importantly, companies that are coming into the market. See, the interesting thing about the medical industry and medical device, I told you about this market. It's so big, it's so changing, that the traditional players aren't going to be traditional players much longer, because so many companies are coming into it. Sooner or later, your med device may be perfect for CVS or Walmart, who will want to go direct. And that's the point. That's why you have to, as part of the licensing process, you have to think about where else or who else could be a potential candidate for this. And admittedly, it takes some research and experience on it, but this is the thing that you have to think about, because oftentimes it's not always the market leaders are the best ones to go after. I mean, they've got a lot on their plate. They're trying to keep their brands intact. They're trying to keep their company leadership. They're under a lot of pressure. So when you look to license, one of the things that you want to do is think about the companies that are coming in. And you may have come across that. I mean, many times you may be inventing, developing your IP, whatever the case is, and you know of companies, maybe they played a small role over here some years ago or whatever the case is. But many times these companies are coming into the market, because what I always like to say is you never know what's going on behind door number 1, 2, or 3 of any company. They're not going to tell you where they want to go until they find out what you've got, and then they go, oh wow, you know what? We were just thinking we want to head in that direction. And that's why it's important to really go and reach out to these companies. And that's a lot of what I do when I talked about the first part of it, which is the research and the business and the sales. Many times you have to get to a lot of companies, and sometimes I'll dig up companies and say, you know, they're playing over in this arena a little bit. I spotted one patent that they've got. Do I really think that they're interested? And in some cases they are. And that's how I wound up getting to a pharmaceutical company who wanted to get into the oral health care business, which is this, where we made the outreach to the big players, none of them who were interested because they all wanted to protect it, but I found, you know, this patent on this patent landscape, if you've ever done it, but now you can get diagrams and you can see bubbles of who owns it. And the name pops up in the toothbrush area, and it's like, well, what are they doing here? They never had anything. And then I did some more research and discovered, well, they announced 2 years ago they formed a consumer oral health care division. And I said, well, that's great. What do they have? And dug through that, discovered they had toothpaste, Sensodyne. That was it. I said, well, what are they going to do with the division for 2 years? And when I finally got through to the right person in contact, and they said, yes, we would definitely be interested, because they needed something. I mean, and they were an unlikely player, believe me, to be in it. And then there was some challenges with them as well, having never been in the oral health care business and what they did. But the point being is oftentimes you can discover players who are right for your IP who are not mainstream players. They're coming into the market. And that's what makes it very challenging. See, everybody likes to go after the market leaders. They're bombarded. They get this stuff all the time. But they may not necessarily be the right ones. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're licensing with the right kind of partner who's going to support what you have. Does this make sense? Any questions on this? And I mentioned this, but the big challenges when you deal with these companies, especially big, it takes a lot of time. The biggest challenge you have is finding the right people in that company. That's the biggest challenge, especially if they have a lot of divisions. And when I reached out to these big pharmaceutical and medical devices, I would wind up having to contact 6 or 8 different people sometimes in different divisions. Because just because they have the title of our VP outside innovation doesn't mean anything. Because they may not be the outside innovation that your innovation falls in. Sometimes I've gotten in through the CEO. Sometimes I've gotten in through the VP of finance. Sometimes it's been the VP of marketing. Sometimes it's been product development. Sometimes it's been sales. And so part of the challenge is these companies are looking for innovation, but they themselves may not even be organized. And one of the worst places that you can go, if somebody says, oh, send it to our patent counsel, our IP counsel. Do not do that. That's not their job. Their job is to take the technologies, develop the patents, write up the patents, file the patents, handle the litigations, write the cease and desist letters, their job is not to evaluate outside IP. And they're not the best outside IP because they're trained from the legal perspective. They're not trained from the business perspective. They're trained for the legal side of IP, which is the contracts, the litigation, the claims, things like that. You need to go in from the business side, the people who are doing the business. And part of that is finding which people do that. And I've got to tell you, a lot of these companies say that they're looking for it, but they do not have any organized structure. It just sits there. So sometimes the response, I get responses. In fact, I'm working on the balance board. I'm still getting responses from companies that I contacted 6 months ago who are finally getting back, saying, send me more information. It just, because of the nature of what the industry is, and that's part of the challenges of licensing. So keep that in mind. And here's the next most important thing that you need to do. And let me ask you a question. Can somebody raise their hand and tell me what their IP is in 50 words or less? And how it works and what the benefits are? Okay. Either one. Both of you.
It's a device to address the UTIs and get away from pills and creams, and testing has been done.
Okay. How do I make money with it?
By
Why is it better?
selling a device that basically is inserted overnight and it gets rid of the UTI.
You still haven't told me why it's valuable to me. Why is it? See, here's what I'm getting at.
The market is 50 million women.
Oh, I
in the
understand.
United States.
I understand what the market is. But here's the thing. I need to know, how am I going to make money with it? Why is it better? What problem does it solve? I already know the size of the market. I know it. But if you say to me, this device can be used by any woman or patient in a fraction of the time, and it lowers the liability cost by 50%, now you've got my attention. Now you have my attention.
Eliminates the after effects or problems.
The what?
It eliminates the problems that exist with treatment as present.
Okay. You have to qualify that. You have to say it will reduce by 50%, it will reduce by 60%. See, I got the attention. Like, I go back to that cooking technology. When I looked at it, I said, what is the thing that's going to grab their attention? And I said, 60% reduction in fat in fried foods. Okay? That grabs them because that's solving a problem. What you need to do is you need to quantify. See, most of the time what happens is you'll go out and you'll describe what your IP is, but not the benefit, the problem, or the money I'm going to make, or how it's going to address the market. That's what you need to get to first. You can do the description of the technology and how it works, that's fine. Do that after. The first thing you want to do is you want to explain to any company what you are going to do, whether it's reduce liability, increase profits, make more money, save them money. That's what they want to know. Once you do that, then you have a conversation. I was going to say you were going to mention your IP.
50 words or less. Smart mobility aid that replaces the cane, that makes it easier to walk, harder to fall, and provides pervasive gait analysis for both clinicians and caregivers.
Okay, that's better. But can you quantify it in terms of what percentage does it make better? Does it lower their liability? Will there be a higher compliance rate with it? In other words, the mobility, I'm saying, is it 50% more effective in enabling people to be more mobile than current devices on the market?
It addresses the 5 key risk factors that lead to 1 of 3 seniors falling each year, which accounts for 1.5 emergency room visits, 800,000 hospitalizations, and about $5 billion in costs.
But what does it do from a... okay, so it does those factors, but how can you quantify those for me? What can you tell me in a dollar and cents or a percentage increase or decrease or whatever that I could wrap my head around and say, wow, you're saying that you could improve by 50% the mobility of walking assisted seniors?
Well, who are you? I mean,
No, I'm just doing this as if you were
I
presenting.
understand, but you were saying before that there's different applications.
Right, but I'm saying, assuming that it's one market application, that you're going to a company that assists, is in that field. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you quantify, you see, you have to quantify to them to let them know. I mean, it's great that your device does all that, but if it doesn't do it to any significantly better level than what's out there, why are they going to take it?
You want the answer?
Yes.
Objective data regarding recoveries as opposed to a patient-reported outcome, which is time-consuming.
But that's objective data on yours, correct? And what is that objective data? It significantly increases.
It's more detailed, it provides evidence-based outcomes which are now required. It follows the patient home, for which clinicians have no tool now. So we're competing against a back.
And so, but each of those benefits you can quantify. For example, if it follows the patient home, that means you're going to get higher compliance rate, or it's going to be healing 25% faster. Or because you're able to follow them home, we can reduce your non-compliance liability by 15%. You see what I'm getting at here?
Absolutely.
Is when you do it that way, you're now equating the cost benefit with your device. But when you just explain what the device is, it makes it very difficult for any of these companies to grab their mind around it, because see, when you explain what your device does, this is all that they work on all day. They know what devices do. They know what they do. What they're looking for are solutions to problems. So anytime you can quantify what your device does, reduce liability, make the compliance higher, do this, eliminate 50% of insurance claims, drive your cost structure down 35%, now you've got their attention. Because now it's doing something that they need to investigate.
You brought up if you don't mind, like
Yeah.
continuing with this. So as you said earlier, there are companies, leaders, market leaders that have no interest in disruption whatsoever.
Right.
So to go to them and say, oh, you're going to be able to sell something that's safer, that's desirable, that's going to provide all the societal benefit, give you better profit margins, you're disrupting you're breaking up a great party that they've got going.
Sure.
So
You share it with them. If they don't want it, that's their issue. And it happens. Believe me, I went around. I mean, these companies aren't interested. But when you do find the companies that are interested, that's how you get their interest. And remember this, you talk to one person, this happens. You talk to one person. 3 months later, they've left. Okay? And I've had this happen. 6 months later, this email arrives from somebody that says, I'm so-and-so, and I'm now doing this thing. I saw your email. Is this IP still available for license? See, that's part of the challenge in this market. These people don't stick around. And that's why it's important that when you are out there and you are telling them what you've got, and that's why I like to use 50 or 100 words and be concise, because if you can nail it with what they are going to get out of it, their cost, their benefit, their profit, that's going to stick around a lot longer than some product description. Okay, product description is what they can get in a catalog. What they can't get is if you're telling me you're going to reduce my liability on insurance by 50%, I need to talk to you about that. Because that 50%, you don't have to know what that represents. You don't have to dig in and do all the research to discover that they've got, $350 million in insurance claims every year. But if you're saying to them, I can reduce it by 50%, even if you were off by half and it was only 25%, somebody's going to want to talk to you because that's huge. That's how you attract their attention, because that's what this is all about. I mean, it's nice to have all, like I said, these devices that work, but if you can do something like that and quantify it, you'll get their attention. Not everyone is going to respond though, so understand, they aren't going to all get it, but the ones that do get it, it's one of the fastest ways. And that's why I say 1 or 2 sentences in an intro email. If you can do it in 50 and 100 words, that's the way to go. What's your attention span? If you get a 4-paragraph email, how long are you going to read that? You're probably not. You're not. So one of the first things that I do is I figure out that technology. And one of the hardest things for everybody to do is you have to sit down and you have to extract from it and say in 50 or 100 words, not what it does, but what is the quantifiable benefit or problem I'm going to do for you? Because then you can open up and have that discussion. Then they'll want to know. Does that make sense? It's your elevator pitch, basically, but you have to do it a little differently because you have to get their attention. Okay, that's telling me I have to be attentive here because we're coming up on the... So let me wrap this up by just getting through a few things. Getting paid, this goes back to the validation. It's basically this. The closer you are to market ready, the higher your royalties. The further away, the lower your royalties. Okay, if you've got just a raw patent, don't expect too much on royalties. But if you're in the market, ready to market, that's a big market, you'll get higher royalties. This will give you an example of what it looks like. And this, this comes from research, but just to give you an idea of how that royalty may work. And keep in mind one of the columns there, the second column. What does that second column say?
Risk.
Okay? That's basically what you have to look at with royalties. The higher the risk, the lower the royalty. The lower the risk, the higher the royalty. I mean, obviously nothing can be risk-free, but that's pretty much how the negotiations work. Now, I gave you a handout sheet. It's the licensing cheat sheet, and on there, if you're in a negotiation, you're stuck, you're ever not sure what you should negotiate for, use the 5% rule. 5% rule says ask for 5% because that's generally the average of what the going royalty is. And I share that with you just because a lot of people have those questions.
Can I just ask a question on this? So are you then adding those percentages together? So if you had a product that was patent pending, FDA approved, and been through clinical trials, are you saying that you can kind of take those numbers and add them together? Or?
No. What it's saying is this shows you how the royalty could potentially increase at whatever stage. For example, if you go in and you have an issued patent and that's all you have, you may, and somebody says, well, I really like it, but you may only wind up negotiating a royalty for 1% because there's too much risk in it. They may only agree to give you 1%. On the other hand, if you've got FDA approval, you've brought the risk down considerably. Now they may be willing to give you anywhere from 5 to 7%, depending on what it is. So it's not a cumulative thing. It's just showing how, from a negotiating standpoint, you can increase your potential payout from a royalty as you go further down the development cycle.
What is that based on? Is it a gross number, net number? How many different-
Good question. It's generally what's called a net sales number. And you have to be careful with this when I say net sales. I mean, gross sale, it's technically net gross. What it means is there's a limitation on what's deducted. One of the things you don't want to ever get paid on is net sales after I deduct for production, advertising, distribution, returns, allowances. Because then you're going to get paid on zero. Generally what you want to get paid on is we'll get paid on what's called gross net. We'll allow you for damaged goods, returns, certain level of discounts, but you're not going to deduct anything for production, distribution, sales, marketing, advertising, anything like that. And you have to be very careful with that, and it's an important distinction. And by the way, you don't necessarily always get paid in a percentage. You could get paid on a fixed amount too. Percentages are just more the norm, but you can also do a fixed unit. There's many ways of negotiating and paid, so this is just to give you an example of what it looks like, but believe me, I've negotiated deals that go up in royalty rate, down, go from fixed fee to percentage, and everything in between. Make sense?
We just say again, the way you're defining net growth is damaged goods, returns, and what else?
Well, it could be what's called allowances, but that's just one variation. That may not be applicable to every industry. It's better to think of it this way. What you don't want to do, see, when a net sales is defined, it means net of all the expenses that it took to get those sales. That's not what you want to get paid on. You want to get paid on basically their gross sales, but anytime you're dealing with a company, there's always going to be some allowance for some deduction. For example, if they have medical devices that are shipped out, let's say to hospitals and stuff, and 10% of them get damaged in shipment, they have to replace them. So what they would do is they would come back and say, well, look, we had 10% damage, so we're not going to pay a royalty on that since we got them returned and we had to replace them. That would be one example of a damaged good. So the allowances are generally for something that has to do with the technology or product going to the end consumer or the user, but then having the manufacturer having to do something to either replace it or perhaps they didn't get as high a price because maybe some hospital came along and said, look, we have 30 in our membership, so if you'll take the price down to, from $3 to $1.50, we'll buy, 4 times as many. So then they're going to come back and say, well, we had to do a discounted price, but they bought 4 times as many.
Just one other thing, is commissions and distribution costs part of that net?
Generally, it's not. Again, the commission becomes part of distribution, so it's usually not part of it. And keep in mind, it's all negotiable though. Keep in mind, it's all negotiable. So it could be, but from my perspective, I always like to keep it as minimal as possible and get the most amount of money.
There's a huge market with non-US use products just for export. Doesn't need FDA
Right.
approval, about $41 billion a year. What would be the percentage of royalties for those kind of products?
Well, if it's just an export deal where they're buying from you, it could either be a distribution deal where you're the middleman and then they're paying you a percentage of whatever they buy it for. That's one way of doing it.
And what would be the percentage?
It's all negotiable, really. It just depends on the profit margin. A lot of this depends on profit margins, too. If they're razor thin and they're only making like 10 or 12%, they're not going to pay you much. Make sense? And when you're negotiating a deal, 3 things to keep in mind. 1, your partner is the most important. 2, make it performance-based. Every agreement you want to do is performance-based. Everybody agrees to do something, and then if they don't do something, they either fix it or the agreement ends. And that's how you protect yourself. That's how you keep your IP intact. Everything is performance-based, whether it's product development, FDA approval, marketing dates, start selling, start marketing, whatever the case is, they're all put into the contract. And then finally, don't sign a bad deal. If you feel like this is a bad deal, if you're feeling uncomfortable with your partner, don't sign the deal. Because I can tell you it's terrible once you're in a deal trying to get out of it, especially if they're a bad partner. A bad deal is worse than no deal at all. You're better to just back out and go find another company. But I can't say that enough. Do not sign a bad deal, you'll regret it. Let's see. Couple of and that goes along with mistakes. Here's just a quick list for you of some of the mistakes that I see a lot of. And number 1, this is important. You've always got to check competitive products, because any IP that's ever presented in any company, I mean, these companies are smart. They're going to look at what they've got. They're going to look at what the competition. If you're not ready for that, there's nothing more uncomfortable than having a meeting with a company who comes back to you and says, by the way, I found this on the market. It sure looks a lot like yours, because now you're in a position of having to go through the whole thing of why you're different. It's always better to know this stuff up front, because see, if you know your competitive products up front, you can bring that into the discussions right up front, and you can use that to your advantage. You can basically show them the competitive product, why you're better, why you reduce costs more, why you're lower costs, why you reduce life, and you can actually use that to your advantage. But if you don't do your research on a competitive product and they find it, then it gets challenging. Then your discussions kind of start going sideways. People start wondering, is your IP really that unique? Things like that. Make sure you do your homework. We talked about validation. We talked about it just being a patent. Don't go to market with just a patent. Wrong information. This is very important, and I shared with you a little bit about that email, giving them the right information. This is critical. One of the most important things you can do is do not give them everything all at once. Give them a little bit each time and expand it. Okay? One area that I see, I have clients and they come to me, and one of the things that I do is I work with them. I say, when we have this meeting, you're going to focus and say only this. And you're only going to discuss this. Because I'm sure you've had the experience. You go into a meeting and then you start having these conversations and you say something, and suddenly what happens? Suddenly somebody globs onto something and starts going in this direction, and it's not relevant. And then what happens? The deal starts to unravel over something that wasn't relevant. So when you're dealing with IP, the most important thing is you stay focused and you only give them the information they want. One of my clients, we were negotiating the deal, and he's like, well, we've got all these patents coming down the pike. Can I tell them about the PCT and we're doing this? I'm like, no, You do not say anything beyond what the goal is to sign the deal. Sign the deal, put the check in the bank. Once you've done that, you can fly over and spend days having a party and talk about everything that you want. But the moment you introduce all these other extra things, people have a funny way. I mean, especially when you're evaluating. Oh, this. Well, what does this mean over here? What is it? Don't do that. Stay focused. Bring the deal home. Then you can tell them about the other things. Or if they ask about something, you can tell them. That's why you have to unveil your IP in a certain way. And I have a certain process I use. It starts with that short email. Then the next documents they get are just a little more detail on it. Then they maybe get a video, then they get more, then they have the conversation with the client, and then when we get to the R&D or the scientist or whoever it is, then I let them go and do their scientific R&D talk. But I just monitor, I listen, because I said, look, if anything comes up with deal points, you stop, you let me step in there. Because the important thing is to keep that deal going forward. Okay? And then the final point, of course, is legal and professional advice. Don't sign any contract unless you've had an attorney review it. Have them draw it up even better. And if you're in doubt about handling the licensing process and you need professional advice, you bring on somebody such as myself to manage it for you, because in many cases it's going to turn out a lot better for you than doing it yourself. So that's it. 5 golden rules. Again, just recapping, prove it works, do your homework, make it a win-win deal, show them the money, and make it a win-win. So that wraps it up. And for those that haven't signed up or would like to sign up, I have a newsletter. Comes out every week or so from my blog, talk about all sorts of licensing strategy tips, events coming up like this, things like that. So with that, I'll wrap it up, open it up to question and answers, and